And welcome back to Mixed Media Live. I am really excited for this episode because we're broadcasting to a whole new audience. Those of you on Rumble have been listening to the podcast for some time now. It's the 32nd episode. It's pretty crazy to think about, but it's been a fun journey. But it's great to see the show evolve. Definitely. I think the biggest thing I want to get out up in front is thank you to Rob Sharma, who made this possible by supporting us on Locals. It's invaluable, this kind of leap that we're taking forward because of his help. And because of that, I'll be putting a link to some of his credentials in the description of the final version of this podcast. And the other thing is, if you want to support us, we have a lot of perks. And the great news is that I'm at a point where I'm sort of taking a little bit of a pivot in my, personal filmmaking journey, my personal business journey, where I'm sort of to pivot away from freelance and towards a little bit more of a, I would say, like audience building mode that I'm gonna go into. So I'm excited for the channel because of that. I'm gonna be freeing up some time for myself because of that, which is nice. So expect improvements sooner than I usually say. Which is to say, sometimes I say I'll do something, it'll take me a month for it to actually show up on the podcast. But yeah, who is Mixed Media? What is Mixed Media? Mixed Media is a weekly live podcast. It's like a radio show that appears every Friday at 7 p.m. on YouTube, Rumble, and Twitch. So shout out to the YouTube and Twitch out there as well. You guys are awesome. And what we do is we talk about all things art. We each come at it from our particular interests. So film, gaming, and music tends to be the biggest things. We also talk about general things like art business, art philosophy, practically anything. We react to your stuff, and that's what we're going to be doing today. Today we'll be reacting to your hot takes on Reddit, as well as reviewing an indie composer's music, which I'm really excited about. So yeah, without further ado, I guess we'll introduce ourselves. So my name is Irving. I'm a filmmaker and media entrepreneur. I own a company called Ariella. If you can see there, I've got an Ariella sweatshirt right there. I always got to rep my company when I'm on stream. So you can go to my website and check out my stuff. Ben, who are you?
I'm Ben Costello. I'm a flute player and a media composer.
Yeah, and usually we have a third with us. My brother, Nathan Nestor, he's in college, so he's a little bit inundated. I think he has something like 3 exams tomorrow or something like that. So I know how that feels like. And yeah, we decided to cut him some slack today. So wish him luck. So yeah, I guess we'll start with Ben's segment. I don't think I have much else to say in the intro. We'll just hop right into the review. And I'll just change the plate. So yeah, go ahead, take it away.
Yeah, so we haven't done a review of someone's art in a little while. So I looked around on the usual Reddit sites that I've combed through before, and it's one piece that I found. It's called a track called "Sunshine and Lasers" by Nick O'Brien. And I'm not sure if Nick is listening to the show or not. If you are, you're welcome to comment on anything I say. You can comment in the live chat. If not, we'll just keep going. So this is a short track, and I believe it is billed as a kind of adventure theme for an RPG game. It's pretty short, so we can just listen to the whole thing. So if you want to pull that up, Irving.
Yes, I will do so now. Give me 1 second.
Is it just on my end that it's not playing?
Yeah, I'll just chime in with my quick, uneducated thoughts. there's quite a
Sure.
there's quite a journey there. I really liked the journey from front to end. Yeah, a lot of variations on a theme, but still interesting nonetheless from front to back. So I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, your opinion is pretty, you, I don't know, I can say more valuable than mine, but you're more familiar with the video game and RPG world than I am. And of course, Nathan certainly is. Unfortunately, Nathan is not here to give
Yeah,
his thoughts on it. So, yeah, I'll say up front that like my experience is much less in the video game world than it is in the film world. So take non like purely note wise things with it with some grain of salt. Although I don't have that much to say on like the narrative front. I think overall it's a really nice track. It's very light overall, even when you get large. And I mean, maybe light isn't the right word because I have some comments on thickness of things, but maybe we should say I'll say like kind of clarity of texture. Like there are very few things going on, and they're all very well defined. Even when it gets larger and louder, and that can be a good trait. It depends on what you're looking for. I tend to like writing in that kind of lighter manner as well. I think it works here. Is a lot that's kind of, at least to me, reminiscent of Desplat and some of his, film stuff. Like I'm thinking in particular of Little Women, his recent score. Well, not that recent, but right before the pandemic. I guess almost 2 years old now. But
yeah,
yeah, the kind of like light string texture in some kind of 3/8 6/8 piano kind of dominating the melody, and then a couple of woodwinds and well, he doesn't use any brass in that score, but kind of light wind texture along with the piano. It reminds me of that. Probably not anything that you were thinking of, but that's kind of first impression that I got from it. But overall, very, very well put together piece. You can see that you thought about. I think the composer mentioned thinking about looping here, and so we got that kind of repeat, and that works really well, I would say. Obviously, if you're writing for a game that doesn't exist,
yeah,
you're making up where you want it to loop. But as a piece in itself, it works, I would say. So the first question I would have is, do you want this to be performed like in your ideal version of this? Is the piece would it be performed by live musicians or just being done by virtual instruments? Because if it is being done live, there are a couple of considerations I would want to make. And I hope that like ultimately, your goal is to have a live orchestra record music that you write. Now, I think ultimately that's every composer's goal, even if they exist, only in the virtual world, or something for composers that, when you have live musicians play it, it's just so much better than anything you can do, even with the best programming. There are like a handful of notation things that you could look at. A few spots where you want to make sure that you're using correct, I don't want to say beaming, but grouping of rests. But there are very few spaces where that's an issue. Just make sure that generally, if you want 4/8 notes of rest total, right, in 6/8, if you want dotted quarter and then 1/8 rest, not just a half rest, because you're probably going to throw people off, especially if they're not playing that bar in a kind of a hemiola 3. So that happens in a couple of spots. I would make, if you want to record this with live orchestra, I mentioned this on past shows, the importance of measure numbers and like really large measure numbers. I'm sure Irving is familiar with that. Also,
Yes.
big time signatures is useful. I'm not sure. It's a little hard to tell from the score that was, on the YouTube video, whether you just wrote flute or flutes, because I know the very end you have flute. I guess what it's flute 2 come in for like one measure, like the last measure or two. So that might be something to note too. But you want two people, and note one person playing melody when you want only one person playing it. It's not obvious until the end there you want 2 flute players, but so you want to make those things obvious as possible in the score. One thing that I was a little confused by is I think you mentioned somewhere in one of your comments or in your description on Reddit that you're thinking of a mixture of going between Lydian and mixed Lydian, and there's certainly some mixed Lydian stuff. Although I wasn't really sure. I don't think there's anything Lydian in there. So
you want to explain
sure
like there. Somewhat what that means for people who don't know?
Sure. So kind of in traditional Western theory, there are the 7 church modes, or not church modes, Greek modes as well. Ostensibly, they're based on ancient Greek scales, which, probably not actually true. They're all named after different places and other, ancient Greek things. And so it's probably somewhat of an invention of the Catholic Church in the Middle Ages, that these trying to draw some kind of seemingly legitimate connection to Greece. But basically, the simplest way to think about them is if you just take any scale, right? If you take like the white notes on a piano, okay, and you start on the pitch C and go C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, right? The next highest C, that would be the first mode. And technically, the church modes are slightly different. So in the Middle Ages, but for our purposes, right, these modes, so all the white notes C to C would be the first mode of the Ionian mode. Dorian mode is the same notes, but you start on D. So, the pitch center is D instead of C, and, the scale is D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D. Phrygian would start on E with the focus being on E. So mixed Lydian would be starting on scale degree 5, and Lydian is starting on scale degree 4. And the characteristic sounds of mixed Lydian being like a major scale, but with a flat 7, and the Lydian being a major scale with a sharp 4. A lot of composers tend to think in terms of these modes, especially if they're, not thinking in terms of major, minor. So yeah, nothing wrong with not having anything Lydian, but I wasn't sure what you're referring to. I don't think there's any Lydian character in that. A couple of other smaller things I would note. When you have the bass come in and it's playing like those, I don't have the measure numbers because it's kind of hard to see the measure numbers on the score on YouTube, but you have the bass when it comes in kind of a larger section, and they have like those measures where they're doing D, D eighth notes, D, 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 and you have them a kind of slur mark over all of them. Do you want, the question I would have for you is, do you want the basses to play that in one bow stroke? You actually do the same thing at that part with all the strings, where they're doing the 3 quarter notes, all one bow stroke, but you want them all to be accented, which is a little bit difficult for string players to give a really hard accent if they're not giving it, re-bowing. So, think about whether you actually want all that to be played in kind of one legato bow stroke, or whether you kind of what performance section you want there. Because as it is, they're gonna, it's gonna be a little bit smoother than you want it to be because they're gonna try and play in one bow stroke. I would say, just from a purely mix standpoint, when you have the muted trumpets playing, that's pretty low in your mix. And in real life, that's probably going to be, even though they're muted, it's going to be a little bit louder than you think, especially because you have the strings in kind of a thinner, it's not it's going to be strings are also probably going to be louder than you imagine that they will be, which I'm going to mention in a second. But the trumpets are definitely going to be louder than they are in your mix in real life. So if you want to, make the mix a little bit more realistic, you want to bring them up, because I could barely hear them in your mix. In terms of the strings and the size of your ensemble, and you don't mark the VZ. At least I can see it on a little score on YouTube for the violas when they're playing their kind of constant eighth note pattern pretty much throughout, except for in a really large section. So I assume you want them to be divided there, right? Have half play of a top note, half play of a bottom note, instead of doing a double stop. So it's probably polite to the players to mark that. And then I would think about the balance within that. Because if you can have all the first violins playing one pitch, all the second violins playing the next pitch, and then the, 6 violas on, if you're assuming we're like a standard size orchestra, right? 16, 14, 16 on pitch 1, highest pitch, 14, 16 on second highest pitch, 6 on the next one, and 6 on the next one. There's a big drop there, especially because you don't have anything larger, on the larger string instruments playing there underneath of them. So, I would think about the balance with that. And then I would also think, is that sound with, depending on the size of orchestra that you want, especially, but if you are going with like a full, string section, is that going to be a little bit too much for the rest of the texture with like the piano and the winds? I mentioned Desplat's Little Women score earlier, and I think that might be a good score to, because I said, it's got a lot of elements that are very similar to this in it. A lot of the tracks are, especially the ones that I would pay attention, in particular the ones that have woodwinds, and note the kind of size roughly of his ensemble, especially the string players, and how few that there are in order to achieve that really light texture and have the winds kind of be of equal power to them, and the piano as well. So that might be a score just to listen to or transcribe it. I actually just listened to it and transcribed a lot of it myself, because it's such a light texture. It's really not that hard to transcribe it. So I would think about that and think about, his balance, and then ask yourself whether you really what size of string section you want there. I think also in general, you could probably have maybe a few more expression and dynamic markings throughout. I think that would just, in real life would give more life to your score. The players are going to, be able to get more into it and shape it a little bit more. I mean, they'll do it if you have a good players anyway, but it's always good to kind of show them what you want, and not just let them kind of make it up themselves and rely on their own intuition. I would caution that, like, too, that if you're going to have this is just one track from a hypothetical sort of game, but I would caution from too much of like the same repeated pattern, like, what I'm not sure if I remember exactly what I think is A G, in the violins, right? A G G G A G G G for a very long time. So if you're gonna write something longer in this style, you might want to consider as also giving a little bit more of interest to the different players, and not having them just kind of do the same note, right? And do that for a long time, because people will eventually, they won't tell you, but they'll eventually get tired of that. So just something to keep in mind for kind of larger things. You might think too, but if you have a little bit longer track, maybe varying the harmony a little bit more, instead of just kind of mostly being, kind of repeated pattern of planing major nine chords, or major chords, sus2, I guess it's how you're voicing it, which is not non-functional, but just kind of planing that. You could maybe try and create a little bit more harmonic interest in something a little bit longer than this length of a track. I think it's effective here. The only other thing I would say is, you have the section that repeats or loops, depending how you want to think about it, And when you come out of it, you just have everyone end on like, I think just a quarter note and that next measure. And then they drop out and the piano starts the melody immediately right there. That felt a little abrupt to me. There are different ways you could approach it, but I think what you're going to find is if you don't give the player some kind of indication, to decrescendo or something, or provide some sort of break, or transition there, you're going to find, I think, that you're going to go from like a lot of volume to and covering up the beginning of the piano to nothing very quickly, and it might be a little bit jarring. I do like though that at the end, right after at that section after the looped or repeated section, instead of having all the string players play that pattern, you just have the divided violas, and I think that a little bit lighter there in terms of like raw sound, not like thickness of texture, but like in terms of raw sound. And I think that in some ways is maybe a little bit more effective and maybe a little bit closer to what you want if you don't have a small ensemble. If you have a large ensemble, I think that kind of thinner texture, just the violas and the piano playing your repeated chord pattern at the beginning could be really effective. Yeah, so there's a lot of stuff there, but I think it's a very well written track overall. I think the melody is very nice. I know you mentioned that it's a reference to some other theme that I'm just not familiar enough with video game themes to know what it is. But I think you've crafted really nice texture, really open texture, very clear texture, very good sense of drama within the track. And yeah, I think it's kind of thing that could work pretty well overall in a game setting. Although I'm far from the expert on that sort of thing. So definitely keep up the good work. And I do really think that listening to some Desplat, especially Little Women, is a good thing to help you think about size of ensemble and balance, and like strings that are supposed to be light but also with like important melodic stuff in the piano and winds.
I think that was extremely valuable, by the way. I'm always amazed when you go deep into it. Just a lot of like practical stuff, just a lot of good advice. So what's the person's name? I don't know if you said it earlier or...
I believe the person is Nick O'Brien.
Okay, well, congrats, Nick O'Brien, on finishing something that is good. I can't you can't understate how impressive it is when someone actually puts their mind to something and actually completes it. And I say that maybe I'm projecting because I have that problem all the time. But
completing things is so hard.
Yeah.
Someone gave a comment in the live chat from Leroy Jenkins who says, "What video game is it in? What video game is it in reference to?" I didn't hear that part. I'm not sure. The composer on Reddit and their description of it said that it's in reference to something. It's just something like bonus points if you know what it's a reference to. So I don't get the bonus points.
There's a link in the chat actually with the YouTube video. So if you want to check it out and see if you can guess the video game link, and you come back and you tell us, that's bonus points for you. Because I'm curious to know as well if it's like I couldn't, whatever it was, I definitely didn't catch it the first pass through, and I'm also not the most well versed in video game music for sure. Oh yeah, and I had this random thought while you were talking. I was like, what if Nathan gave you some like video game music suggestions to look over or something like that? I think there's some more like some things that come to mind immediately are like the Halo soundtrack is very well loved. I have not listened to it in, I don't know, I don't remember it at all, so I couldn't comment on it personally. But like there's stuff like that, so it'd be interesting to get your thoughts on those things.
Yeah, if he wants to give me some recommendations, I'll definitely listen to them. So
yeah. And so, yeah, everyone can check out this person's work in the link in the description. If you're listening in post, the link will definitely be there. If you are live right now, it's in the live chat. So if you want to check it out, go give them a like. Tell them that you heard it on this podcast too, so that they know that we did this for them. And also, if you really like it and you want to share it amongst different communities, share their stuff. If you like stuff, give it love. Don't go come across things you love and then just pass through them and not give someone who could use a little, arm up, a little arm up, just by hitting the like button or something like that.
Yeah, I've been, I subscribe to all the different links for everyone I've reviewed so far on our show, and I've kept track of the different things they've put out. So.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, perfect. See, Ben's putting in the work. Hit the like button.
I don't want to cause no problems. I just want to live my life, but I keep on hearing about nonsense. Me and my dons ain't mobsters, but when you see imposters, we know how to read them faces, same way you know how to read them comments. If you want to talk, let's talk, but around here, make sure you're walking your talk is constant.